Hello guys, in this example we're going to take a look at finding velocity, acceleration and speed of a particle with the given position function. It is a lot of work, but some things will simplify, so we will see. First, you're going to need to know some basic derivatives. So e to the at derivative is a e to the at. So a is just a number, and this comes straight from chain rule because derivative of at is a. And derivative of e to the power u is e to the power u. Also, you need to know that derivative of sine t is cosine t, which hopefully you know. And also derivative of cosine t is negative sine t, negative sine t. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at the derivative, first derivative, which is the velocity vector. Now, we do have to use product rule here. Why do we have to do that? Well, because you have two functions that are multiplied and each one has a variable in it. Whenever we have something like this, we must use product rule. Derivative of e to the negative 3t, that's using the rule I wrote over here. That's just negative 3 goes in the front, and then e to the negative 3t multiplied by the second function without change. That's the way the product rule works. And then plus the first function without change times the derivative of the second, which is cosine. Okay, that's the x component of velocity. Now let's look at the y component of velocity. This will become, again, negative 3 e to the negative 3t multiplied by cosine, no change. Then it will become e to the negative 3t times the derivative of cosine, and that's sine, but with a minus. Never put a minus in here. This is not right. You do not want to do that, because if you put a minus right here, this looks like subtraction, and you really do not want it to look like that because it's not. So you just need to switch the sign over here. So if it was a plus, it'll become a minus. Finally, for the last term, we get negative 12 e to the negative 3t, because 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. Okay, so that's the velocity. Acceleration is going to be definitely more work, but some things will simplify. Let's see. So for acceleration, each of these will need to be done using product rule, okay, for each one. So let's take the first term. The negative 3 goes to the front. That becomes 9 e to the negative 3t times sine t, no change. Then minus 3 e to the negative 3t times derivative of sine, which is cosine, plus, then again, well, actually not going to be plus because negative 3 goes to the front. So that's negative 3 e to the negative 3t times cosine. And then it will be minus e to the negative 3t sine t, right? Because derivative of cosine is negative sine. That's why the plus turns into a minus. Okay, that's the x component. Let's see if we can find the y component. So this is, again, product rule here, product rule here. Let's just actually insert the negative as part of the product rule. So the first function will become positive 9 e to the negative 3t cosine t, no change. Then plus 3 e to the negative 3t sine t, because derivative of cosine is minus sine, so that's why that's a plus. Then here will be plus 3 e to the negative 3t sine, no change. And then minus e to the negative 3t cosine. Okay, for the last one, that'll be easy because negative 3 goes to the front. That'll become 36 e to the negative 3t. A little bit of simplification here before we finish up with acceleration. If you look at each component, first the x component and the y component, that there are some similar terms. So you can see right here e to the negative 3t and right here e to the negative 3t multiplied by sine t. So this is like your GCF that you can pull out, and then you get 9 minus 1, which is 8. So that becomes 8 e to the negative 3t sine t. Now I'm going to do exact same thing with this term right here. So I'm going to combine these. Factoring out the GCF, you get minus 3, that's minus 6 e to the negative 3t cosine t. Okay, doing exact same thing with this term, with the y term, combining these guys together. So that's like a 1. So this will become 8 e to the negative 3t cosine t. And then plus 3, that's a plus 6. Okay, and then, of course, the last term does not change. We already got that. Okay, so that's the acceleration. The last thing we got to do is we got to find speed, and speed is magnitude of velocity. So how do we find the magnitude? Well, we have to take each component of the velocity, we need to square it, and then we will take one big square root. So we'll take the x component squared, the y component squared, the z component squared, and then we'll just add them up. Okay, so there will be some work to square each of the components, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so we got -3. So I'm just writing the components of velocity, and I want to square them. Okay, so that's the first one. Then under here, I will write the second component. And I also want to square it. That'll actually be a minus. Okay, so you need to compute that. And then I'm also going to square the last component of velocity, which will just be 144. Now, what happens when e to the negative 3t gets squared? Well, that will be e to the negative 6t. Why 6? So let me show you. Whenever you have something like this and then you square it, this is a rule of powers. So whenever you take a number, raise it to one power, and then raise it to another power, so then what happens to these powers is you multiply them. So that's where you get negative 60. Okay, so let's see. What else do we need to simplify this expression? Okay, what else we need, actually the equal sign I'm not going to write because it looks like it's just the top. Okay, what we need is a formula like this. A plus b squared. So hopefully you know from algebra that this is not just a squared plus b squared, that actually you have another term 2ab in between. So let's see if we can use that for each of these. So where does this 2ab come from? If you FOIL a plus b, you will see it. Okay, so first square. So that becomes 9 e to the negative 6t sine squared. Then plus 2ab, so that'll be minus 6. Now, e to the negative 3t multiplied by e to the negative 3t is the same as e to the negative 3t squared, which is e to the negative 6t. And then we've got sine t cosine t. Then we will also square the last term, e to the negative 6t cosine squared. All right, then we'll do the same thing here. So this is 9 e to the negative 6t. Don't worry about the negatives. They always cancel out when you square. Okay, then we have that middle term. So that's a plus 2ab, but both of these are negative, so they will cancel out. That will become plus 6 e to the negative 6t sine cosine. And then finally, the final term will be plus e to the negative 6t sine squared. Why plus? Because when you square a negative, that goes away. Now let's take a look. And then the last term is still 144 e to the negative 6t. So we add all of this up, and that's what we will get under the root. But look what happens. If you look at these two terms, they share 9 e to the negative 6t. So you can pull that out. This is greatest common factor. And guess what you will get? You get sine squared plus cosine squared, which everybody knows is 1. Now, look at these two terms. They cancel out. They're identically the same. Now, look at these two terms. They share e to the negative 6t, which you can also pull out. And then you've got cosine squared plus sine squared. And of course, you also have 144 e to the negative 6t. Now what? Well, knowing that sine squared plus cosine squared is 1, this will just become 9 e to the negative 6t plus 1 e to the negative 6t and plus 144 e to the negative 6t. All of these terms share they share e to the negative 6t, so we can just go ahead and add that up. So we get 10 and 144, that's 154 e to the negative 60. Now, if I take the square root of this expression, that's how I get the speed. This is speed. So the speed is the square root of this expression because this is the magnitude squared. So if you were to simplify this, you get square root of 154. And when you take square root of e to the negative 60, well, guess what? When we took e to the negative 3t and we squared that, we get e to the negative 60 if you take square root of both sides, guess what happens? Square root and square will cancel. That will just become e to the negative 3t. And that is your speed right here. Man, this one was hard.